Hi, this is Sheryl Araxis 3 Productions, and I'm about to present a collage of sorts on my life in Baltimore, my experiences, how I feel. It's a short documentation and not anything extensive, but just something to show what it feels like to live in Baltimore. It is an extended family, which consisted of myself and my sister, my parents, my grandmothers, Idella and Inez, and when they were living, great-grandparents. My grandfather, my adoptive grandfather, Dr. J.E.T. Camper, and my grandmother, Florine, my great-grandmother, Idella, and aunts and uncles. One that was involved in she was a leader and a very outspoken person. She was a lawyer, co-dean of the Antioch Law School, Jean Camper Khan, and she was also a civil rights leader. There was quite a bit going on at the historic landmark, and I can remember when there were deliveries of coal, because that was what we had to heat the home. We played in the coal bin, and deliveries by the Iceman into a wooden refrigerator. So this will be a kind of collage, and it will relay my feelings about Baltimore and what it is like now. Thank you. As I look at my windshield this morning, it feels like the North Pole. As I view the row houses through the ice, and sometimes there's a feeling of desolation as I look at row after row of row houses. Because that's what it is. This is Sheryl Araxis 3 Productions. Row houses from my car. The cars passing by. A church down the street. Here, two houses together. A neighborhood and a house up for auction across the street. Row after row of houses. Almost a feeling of like being in boot camp someplace. How I feel, I don't know. I'm here at Barnes & Noble and have been able to get away. It is my way of getting away by going to the bookstore. I have prepared a small write-up here so that I won't forget what it is I want to say. I was brought up and raised here in Baltimore City at the Dr. J.E.T. Camper Historic Landmark. I am born of mixed heritage background, African, European, and great-great-grandparents of full-blooded Indian descent. It is an extended family where I also was at my father's house, who is an accountant, my mother a seamstress and nurse. My mother and father struggled in their early days to improve their lives and provide my sister and I a college education. If you have a method here, it is great, but it feels like a voice crying out from the wilderness and can only be understood by those living here in Baltimore. It's very cold outside, so I'm staying in the car, but this is the neighborhood, another neighborhood, and as you can see, there is the camera which enables there to be vision when something wrong may have been done, which is sometimes a good thing. Morale here, I don't know, as I've talked to many people who want to simply just get away. Row after row. I, for one, would also like to leave. This is Sheryl Fisher, Araxis 3 Productions, to a better life. As I have wanted to leave Baltimore for a better life many times, I wondered about the ethical treatment and ethics for African Americans living in Baltimore. Those of us who cannot leave because of non-availability of so-called affordable, beautiful, comfortable living, financially out of the reach to many. There are the very old, sick, and disabled, and going to Section 8 is looked upon by many as the nightmare from hell. This is Edmondson Village, a view of Popeyes, which used to be actually a barber shop. And I think there used to be a Hess Shoes up here. So there's a restaurant up there and a dollar store and even an ice cream place, Rita's. So it's part of the neighborhood that I grew up in. This is a sign on the entrance to Edmondson Village. Right now, the businesses are very different from what they were. Across the street is a high school which used to be Heck Company, I believe. If I'm incorrect, I apologize, but I can't remember whether it was Heck Company or Heck May or whatever. But that used to be a department store. It's now a high school. The school actually across the street is Westside Skills Center. And much closer is a new housing development, one of which is one of the better ones I've seen in Baltimore. So it's pretty nice. The rehabilitation of Afro-Americans everywhere, and Baltimore is no exception, has been a slow one. And I say rehabilitation because in 1865, slavery ended, some 152 years ago as of this speaking. A human being can live 100 years. 100 years after the end of slavery would have put an individual of 100 years
in a tumultuous racial period of 1965. 152 some years is not a lot of time to have rehabilitated someone who was taken from one culture, their own, to another culture where they had absolutely nothing of their own. But 100 years as a century is a very long time period for an individual to suffer. Progression through the 150 some years to this point means any snags or setbacks could have a tremendous impact on the morale and emotions of a people who have endured and were conditioned to think in terms of poverty, low capital, low employment, little or no support or services including legal, lesser food quality than surrounding white neighborhoods, no quality housing with little closet, shelf space, and limited bathroom facilities, and disrupted family life. And I might add, what happens when you have little or no closet and shelf space? Things pile up over the years, and there's even less space. And after the death of an aunt, as we went through the house, I wondered, because she had very little clothes and one small closet for clothing. One house of a dead relative had the toilet literally sandwiched between the bathtub and the window. Additionally, Baltimore Afro-Americans are faced with storefronts which are drying up. My adoptive grandfather, Dr. J.E.T. Camper, one of the founding fathers of the NAACP, whose house is now a historic landmark, would probably be rolling in his grave to know that we are still living in stagnation. Afro-Americans have also been taught to be overachievers and that we must work much harder than the white race to make it. We would have to work much harder to get to anywhere that would look like a white townhome as opposed to a black row house in the city.
Is this any way to live normally? In a community when you could have trash cans and hand maintenance to keep it clean? There were trash cans, I was told, in this neighborhood years ago. What do you do when you go on vacation or we don't go on vacation? People can learn when trash cans are available. But what is happening? We have been conditioned already not to care. I'm on my way out to Catonsville this morning, and I have set out from the inner city to go out to the innermost suburbs to do some more video footage, and I will be stopping in a few minutes. I have headed out this morning from the inner city, and I'm now on the outskirts of the inner city in Catonsville. I will be stopping in a few minutes to do some additional footage, which will be very important. I'm here in Catonsville at one of the smaller malls to do some additional video. I'm out here in Catonsville, Maryland, and so many thoughts have entered my mind before, and now I'm presenting them to you. And so many things have entered my mind about working on this video and completing it, to which I will give closing remarks much, much later. I think about those parking signs outside which I left behind in the city, making us uncomfortable, when it could be done by lifting trash by creative hand tools and giving us trash cans. Those signs that make you park here one day and somewhere else the next. We have no garages to cover and keep our cars in and protect our cars like upscale neighborhoods. I thought about the tiny house which my grandmother Inez lived in. This was much smaller than most. I thought about my spaces to work in, which have dwindled over the years for doing productions due to lack of space. I thought about the old Baltimore seafood town where you could get a single $5 fresh crab cake on the run. I thought about quality restaurants, which gave plentiful condiments of salt, pepper, and napkins, and now they withhold the salt, pepper, and napkins. I thought about the time when you could get durable clothing that would fit instead of low rider, below the butt, falling down clothes. We need durable clothes for carrying survival items like cell phone, pen, paper, and keys. Sometimes when shopping for myself, I could only find one clothing item of my size when I really needed 2 or 3 pair. I thought about there were many times when I would go to a food store and find produce rotting on the shelf from the inside out. I thought about how our race has been treated unethically for over a century, which could be the lifetime of an individual. I thought about how our females are being treated unethically who may be trying to make it in this city. I wondered in my own mind whether I myself was being mistreated due to my being on disability, which is completely different from black females who have been on welfare, and many justifiably so, and had to be. I also wondered if requests of black females were disregarded in the place of males only. I wondered about black females being coerced for sexual acts in exchange for home fixer-uppers and other issues. I wondered about medical and dental diagnosis and my own suffering with my current symptom of shaking illness. When I first came out on disability, they were just tics, and I decided that that was just for white girls only. I have also had dental issues and wondered how dentists charge their clients so much money and continue to do lots and lots of needless root canals, and especially for people who are in need of great dental care. I wonder about combinations of transitions which hold us back as a race in Baltimore and also other places. Gender and minority-related issues in combination with old age, disability, and financial issues. And then there are the death and dying issues. When a family gets older and says, who is going to go next? I thought about many people's reactions, which I am in touch with through my spirit mind as to what I have just said, as just putting things in a general box and not really improving anything because that's how it's always done. There's no creative brainstorming for us. And then there's the mistrust that comes through from the governing levels and trickles down, and it finally comes between us and among us. I thought about the powers that be that really don't want to correct things, or do they? Because of their ego and pride and possibly some other issues that get in the way of their moving life in a positive and happy manner for the people and by the people of Baltimore.
Many of the issues which I mentioned previously in Part 5 of this documentary and elsewhere are issues of Afro-Americans in other places of the U.S. However, I do believe that Baltimore is different in many respects, in that somewhere along the way things appear to have gone backwards, aside from the slow progress which African Americans made during the 60s. And I say slow progress because there are memories. Memories that make us feel that we were ditched by the side of the road somewhere. There are memories of the Baltimore projects with crime, rats, and roaches, which were eventually demolished. One such project, Lafayette Courts, was one of America's largest U.S. high-rises. It was demolished in 1995. I know two people who lived in the projects. This is nothing personal, but I wondered if those planning for us just looked at the city and not the people themselves, and just looked for anywhere to put us. Many of the row houses we live in now were passed on to us from Jewish and wealthy whites who left to go elsewhere. I remember my grandmother telling me as a child that Waverly Towers in Baltimore was for whites only.
I am now on the outskirts of Baltimore at a small shopping center. That was a Five Below, which I love. There's some type of nails and hair store. Also, Chinese food, beauty supply, and down further, office supplies, and a medical group. A few other stores. I need to get a new computer because I have dead pixels on my computer, which doesn't get any better, so I need to go to the office supply. So this is a nice little accessible shopping center where you can run around and get some things, but if you want something other or more, you might have to go out further to get those specialized things that you want. And yes, there are memories as a child of establishments where parents and relatives could not enter or try on shoes or go to the bathroom. And through all of this, we did make a slow progress until the light broke through, enabling us to go into those establishments. I would like to reference the Harlem Renaissance in New York, which spanned for 15 years during the 1920s, where art, culture, literature, and intellectualism became the epitome of Afro-American culture in the U.S. This boom did take place in other places, but my reference is for New York. The Renaissance boom was viewed by many as an escape from the old Negro patterns to the emergence of the new Negro in America. It was a form of escape, and why not, as there was so much suffering from the past. The Harlem Renaissance was a kind of melting pot for a great migration of people of color to the North so that they could express, stabilize, and find some kind of freedom in their lives. It was a magnet for a growing Negro middle class. However, everywhere there were identity issues. For women, equality and self-esteem were issues in gender and beauty as to whether they were accepted and according to their skin color of dark skin or light skin. Even though the Harlem Renaissance flourished, there were still racial conflicts, and along with the Great Depression, an end came to the glorious era, while many white establishments still flourished. I will make the assumption that there was probably a lot of anger, suffering, and poverty afterwards. I have referenced the Harlem Renaissance because it shows how people of color flourished against all odds. The decline of the era brought about poverty, unemployment, and more civil rights issues. I say these things because I am certain that in my mind and spiritual soul that mental and emotional problems ensued within the community after. Any rise in affluence and into it is bound to bring about these implications. Baltimore's risings and dips, from my point of view, are no different. Though this is not the complete report, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Minority Health, it states, poverty level affects mental health status. African Americans living below the poverty level, as compared to those over twice the poverty level, are 3 times more likely to report psychological distress. Also, adult African Americans are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress than adult whites. The World Health Organization describes poverty as the greatest cause of suffering on earth. According to Wikipedia, under causes of mental disorders, there are life experience and environmental factors. Causes of mental illness can come from stressors ranging from financial issues to having low self-esteem. Wikipedia states that environmental factors include, but are not limited to, dysfunctional home life, poor relationships with others, substance abuse, not meeting social expectations, low self-esteem, and poverty. In taking these things into consideration, why would anyone expect Afro-Americans with these kinds of conditions to act normally when losses to their welfare and communities continue to go on while large white financial and stabilized organizations continue to flourish? One could expect an analysis that there would be anger, ill feelings, conflicts, and possible riots because of low esteem and lack of care. Riots are not the answer, but what I have stated is the reason. I might add that all human beings are creatures of comfort. Any disruption to their well-being means it evokes the flight or fight reaction in the adrenal glands. We know this. African Americans living in poverty in Baltimore have been looked upon with disdain, even though we know and are knowledgeable about their condition. I heard a woman as I passed by one day say, if someone is killing me, I'm going to fight. Now, what she meant was she wanted to live. Her condition evoked the fight or flight awareness, which can only be attributed to the suffering condition of Afro-Americans in Baltimore, though she would have been blamed by those not understanding as someone who looks like a person who wants to cause trouble. The mental health issues, I believe, are extensive, so I will end this as part 6 of Impressions of Baltimore from my perspective.
years.
My closing remarks for Impressions of Baltimore from My Perspective, Part 8. These are my closing remarks for Part 8 of Impressions of Baltimore from My Perspective. In my closing remarks, I have heard in my inner ear, "Don't be you. Who else would I be if I were not myself?" This movie stems from the understanding that I felt it is necessary. I additionally brought on my own experiences, knowing that any time I could not succeed out of my goals, that something was severely wrong, having lost out in America so many times. Though I certainly would not deny myself any positive outcome from this video, this is not an attempt to make it about myself, but to demonstrate what is happening. My life has not been easy as some would expect, as it started off early teens in one of the most prestigious, then majorly white, all-girls high school, where I was told by a white counselor that I would be better off going to a black college than a practically all-white college in Virginia. I must say, there were a few exceptions like that, as my schoolmate, peers, and teachers were mostly great and very friendly. As a result, I graduated from Howard University with a degree in chemistry, which I am proud of. I took all forms of transportation to my jobs: bus, train, car, and taxi. I worked my way up from a laboratory assistant to a professional chemist in the government, until I became ill and went out on disability with multiple chemical sensitivities and complications. I had worked with many chemicals, many of which could rival Army Agent Orange. I kept my small business, which I felt could sustain me, but I found out along the way that what I was told early on in life was true. We as a race have to work much, much harder to reach our goals. With regards to my business as producer, I had a quintuple whammy and possible other hindrances. I'm Afro-American, female, have a disability, over 60, and have a very high IQ. Being Afro-American was enough, but having a small business as a female in title of producer was surely in juxtaposition to a white male producer. Additionally, I was given gifts of the Spirit, which enabled me to move along with what I was achieving with a high IQ, as Afro-Americans are stigmatized for sports abilities. Also, all the while as I struggled, I was additionally chronologically increasing. It did not matter that I was breathing in hazardous chemicals at a job where I got little thanks and lower pay compared to a man playing sports on a field. I have been faced with comments like, "You don't look like you are Irish," even though I am 10% British and Irish out of 30% European DNA, which I intuitively felt long before the DNA test. A white guy once asked me to forgive him because he did not ask me to stay with my then husband and I because I was black. I remember on one occasion I was asked to perform a procedure from memory on an instrument after being shown by a racially biased supervisor. I did the procedure perfectly, at which she explained I needed to do it again because I did not do it right, even though I did it perfectly. Everyone knew this supervisor was racially biased and talked about it. The other thing is that my own race has been biased by stigma into believing the I-we concept are not good enough to get what is needed. So we become invisible in many ways by those who view us like that and cut off from the rest. Or we become entangled in groups which exclude the rest of us. Along the way, I also realized that people kept on wanting to connect me with rhythm, jazz, hip-hop, reggae, or whatever, instead of the classical new age and instruments I played that the Spirit opened me up. My inner ear keeps on nagging, "Are you doing you?" But thoughts arise when I remember trying to get a write-up from the Baltimore Sun newspaper and how I was practically held invisible while the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper published an article on my music. On the way to my second calling, music, I was being constantly pulled by pitfalls that had nothing to do with that. I was surviving in intricate, complex patterns, semi-homeless with my parents, trying to get away from Baltimore City as chronological and physicality increased. After always trying to make something of myself and years of pursuing this, even though I had been a chemist, I realized I had been had. I began to look around at conditions here in Baltimore, where there are closed-in neighborhoods and lots of control and no clear, clean, wholesome vibrations of real living as our white counterparts. I realized that these conditions are not only in Baltimore. I was an African-American female overachiever living in Baltimore, semi-homeless. As those who have followed along with me well know, I am an overachiever. I would have cherished having been given action out of faith and hope. To be given hope, to have hope, and to pass it on, and then the moment of truth results from that hope to come out of the intricate and complex survival patterns I am living through. I should have been one of the richest women in America, in my opinion. I know that I made this movie and I had to. This is the 8th and last section. With regards to what I have said, there is lots I needed to say, but this would have been much, much more extensive. There are a number of organizations which need to involve themselves in working out resolutions and solutions to these kinds of living conditions for individuals with varied situations, no matter who they are. Even though they are very large organizations, that does not mean that they should ignore you. To discriminate against a person is a tragedy because of hearsay, race, gender, color, religious affiliation, financial status, disability, facial features, etc. It is a tragedy both for the person discriminated against and the person doing it. Those organizations which could actively reach out to an individual are the NAACP, the Peace Corps, Project Hope, the United Nations, Counseling and Connective Services, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, the Bureau of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Department of State, the clergy. I find that organizations such as these need to step in to guide, reorganize, and create smaller organizations that are supposed to be helping, especially disability organizations, which I find do not answer or give a formal boxed answer or do not have the facility. I was compelled to make this movie and took time out from my normal video music production and other projects to do this movie. I may, depending on my health, do a movie on the Afro-American female. I have traveled far and wide. Let the works I've done speak for me. Signing off, Sheryl Fisher, President of Araxis 3 Productions. Thank you.